Good day, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're very excited to present Feed Efficiency 101. We're sorry we had to postpone last week due to illness, so thank you again for your understanding and your flexibility today. I do want to take a moment and mention that we will be taking questions at the end of the webinar, so you may chat in your questions during the presentation. Please keep in mind that we are going to be scheduling an additional webinar next month that will take a more in-depth look into feed efficiency. With that said, I'd like to introduce our two experts today. Our first presenter will be Jeff Clark. He recently relocated to the Black Hills from California. Jeff has an extensive livestock management background ranging from the Central Plains feedlots to both purebred and commercial operations. In the past, he was able to utilize feed intake data to drive efficiency on a large-scale operation. This experience provided Jeff with a unique ability to guide both researchers and producers as they look not only to utilize feedlot equipment, but also how they can capture the full value of the data generated. Our second presenter today will be Ted Cunningham, who is located in South Central Missouri. Ted's experience in the beef industry include beef nutrition, commercial beef production systems, and seed stock management and marketing, which provide him a vast perspective of the beef industry. Ted also owns Cunningham Livestock, which specializes in custom cattle feeding and management, along with replacement heifer and bull development, and currently utilizing smart feed system for measuring feed efficiency. With both of our presenters are very well versed and passionate about feed efficiency and how feed efficiency will be critical for long-term sustainability and profitability in the beef industry. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our first presenter, Jeff Clark.
Thank you, Carla, for the introduction, and hello, everyone. This is Jeff Clark, and I'd like to start off by thanking you all for joining us this afternoon. We're very excited to kick off this two-part webinar series today, beginning with Feed Efficiency 101. As you can see from the title of today's webinar, our focus during the presentation today will be very basic in nature, as we want to make sure that when you sign off of this webinar today, you will be able to answer the following questions. What is feed intake testing? Why is this information valuable? And how is this data accurately collected? Again, I would recommend typing any questions you may have come up during the presentation right into the chat box, as you will have the opportunity to have some of these questions answered at the end of our presentation. So before we really get started here, I noticed from our registration list that we have some folks joining us today that may be unfamiliar with who we are at CLOC, so I thought it might be good to tell you a little bit about us before we get started. Pictured here is CLOC founder and CEO, Dr. Patrick Zimmerman. The Zimmerman family started CLOC with the invention of our flagship product, Green Feed, which is now being utilized in over 30 countries around the world and has grown to become the gold standard in ruminant emission monitoring. As the business has evolved, we have expanded our product offering to include Smart Feed and Smart Feed Pro for measuring and controlling feed intake, Smart Scale for capturing animal weights every time they visit the water source, and our Super Smart Feed line for precision supplementation on pasture. Now, all of our equipment is portable and offers the advantages of wireless communication, providing the user with real-time data in the palm of their hand. Now that you have a better idea of who we are and what we do here at CLOC, let's dive into the meat and potatoes of why you logged on to our webinar today. I think the best place for us to start is to define what efficiency really is. Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines efficiency as the quality or degree of being efficient. Now, in the livestock business, this can be assessed in many different ways, but for the purpose of today's webinar, our focus will be on maximum production with the least possible inputs. With feed costs amounting to roughly 68% of our operational costs as cattle producers, monitoring and selecting for feed-efficient cattle can have a large impact on our profitability. That being said, let's get a few common terms defined. The first one on our list here is contemporary group. This refers to a group of animals that have had an equal opportunity to perform. A contemporary group is often comprised of cattle that are of the same breed composition, sex, are similar in age, and have been raised under the same management conditions. Days on feed is pretty straightforward and refers to the number of days the cattle are fed. Next, we have weight per day of age, which is exactly what it sounds like. Actual weight of the animal divided by days of age. Average daily gain should be one that we are all familiar with and can be defined as the average amount of weight an animal gained each day during a defined feeding period. This is calculated by subtracting the animal's weight at the end of the feeding period by the beginning weight, then dividing this difference by days on feed. Dry matter intake refers to an individual animal's actual feed intake, excluding any moisture. This number is important for obvious reasons, but a good example of why calculating this number is so imperative when making nutrition-based decisions would be if you are feeding haylage that is 65% moisture and has 35% dry matter. This means 1,000 pounds of haylage sitting in the bunk is equal to 650 pounds of water and 350 pounds of actual feed or dry matter. Compare this to feeding baled alfalfa hay that is 87% dry matter. It would only take roughly 402 pounds of the baled alfalfa to equal the dry matter provided by 1,000 pounds of haylage. Last on our list here, we arrive at what is probably the most important number affecting any cattleman's pocketbook. This number is cost of gain. Cost of gain is essentially that. It references what it actually costs a producer to add each pound of gain to an animal. This brings us to our main topic of the day, which is feed efficiency. Simply put, feed efficient animals do more with less. These animals either increase or maintain body mass while utilizing less feed than their contemporaries. Calculating an individual animal's feed efficiency helps us to answer questions such as the one seen on the right side of the slide. Let's say we retain ownership of our calves through the feed yard, and steer A and steer B were both on feed for the same duration and members of the same contemporary group, but steer A gained 4.5 pounds a day and steer B gained 3.5 pounds a day during our feeding period. Is this enough information to really answer the question as to which steer has been more profitable thus far? The answer is no. We don't really know which steer made us the most money until we have an accurate feed intake measurement to compare along with our average daily gain. With this information, we can then calculate each animal's respective feed conversion ratio, which then allows us to calculate our cost of gain. Now let's talk a little bit about how the different measures of feed efficiency can be used to help us select for the most profitable animals. Feed conversion ratio can be calculated by dividing the pounds of dry matter consumed by the pounds of weight gained during the feeding period. This ratio is simply a gross efficiency measurement and does not attempt to partition feed inputs based upon the animal's assumed requirements for maintenance and growth. RFI, or residual feed intake, takes this a step further by evaluating the difference between actual intake and predicted intake based upon the animal's rate of gain, body weight, and composition. In this case, a negative RFI is good. This means the animal required less feed than predicted and is more efficient than an animal with a positive RFI. But remember, this number is only comparable within the contemporary group fed. Residual average daily gain is basically a performance-based metric that calculates the difference between actual gain and predicted gain while taking into account an animal's feed intake, body weight, and composition. A positive RADG is good, as this means that the animal gained more weight than predicted. Now, in order to keep this webinar fairly focused on the basics of feed efficiency and intake testing, we decided to offer a second webinar where we will dive a bit more in depth in regards to how this information is used to calculate various EPDs and dollar indexes, along with highlight practical management applications for utilizing feed intake data in a real-world setting. We don't have a date set as of yet, but stay tuned and we'll keep you informed. At this time, I'd like to hand it over to Ted Cunningham, who will walk us through some of the planning and management that goes into facilitating a successful feed intake test.
Hey, good afternoon, or I should say greetings to everyone, and welcome to the CLOC webinar here today. My name is Ted Cunningham. I greatly appreciate everybody for joining us today. And today I'm going to be kind of discussing the logistics of, actually conducting a feed intake test. So we're going to cover everything from kind of the ground up in terms of the things you need to think about regarding planning, installation, management of the day-to-day workings of an efficiency test, as well as some of the guidelines and record keeping requirements. But before we get started, just want to make sure here. Apologize, my screen's not wanting to advance. There we go. All right, so, kind of before we get started into talking about the how of actually measuring feed intake and efficiency, I just wanted to touch on maybe some of the driving factors behind what we're seeing as really a resurgence in interest in efficiency in the livestock industry, and certainly in particular the beef industry. So, measuring feed intake and feed efficiency on an individual animal basis is not necessarily a new concept. It's been around for several decades, but recently it seems there's been some renewed interest, and I think it's for good reason. This is a very important trait. I think one of the main drivers in interest can be illustrated in this first bullet point, and that is, the effect of efficiency is magnified as input costs rise. And this is a guiding principle, really all industries. For example, if we're a feed yard owner, and corn is going to be, one of our major input feed prices or feed costs. And therefore, the price of that input and then the efficiency of the use of that feed or input is going to have a really huge bearing on what Jeff described as your cost of gain, or basically those production costs. So we evaluate the cost of finishing a steer with $2 a bushel corn versus $6 a bushel corn. I think it's pretty intuitive. We can quickly see that the base input price has tripled. If we imagine there for just a minute, if we improve feed efficiency by 10% and we're feeding $2 a bushel corn, without a doubt, there's an opportunity to reduce input costs and improve margin. But then as we really stop and think about it, as that corn price goes up, the value of improved efficiency is going to have a corresponding increase relative to the input cost. So, a quick example. If a 10% improvement in feed conversion saves us $30 a head, if we're feeding those steers and we're feeding them $2 a bushel corn, we can really easily do the math to show that using or feeding $6 a corn, and again, that same 10% improvement, it's now going to be worth about $90 per head. So it follows right along with those input costs. Another example, and one that I think has historically kind of been overlooked as we discuss feed efficiency, and that's really land utilization or forage utilization. So feed efficiency is not limited to only a feed yard setting and feed yard economics. And I would probably argue that perhaps the greatest return on investment in terms of feed efficiency would really be back to the cow herd. We have animals, that are going to remain in our herd for sometimes, 10, 12, 14 years, and we're paying their feed bill, forage-based intake for those animals we're providing to them for the entire duration of ownership. Similar to our comparison with corn prices, consider, land prices as being the major input for the cow-calf enterprise. And, in this example, I'll illustrate, at least, on a local basis, what I've seen in terms of prices increases over the years of the last 15, 20 years in our area. Maybe going from pasture values at $750 an acre to now $2,000 an acre is very, very likely, and perhaps sometimes hard to find right now. So, fundamentally, as land prices increase, the opportunity to utilize more efficient cattle, find those efficient genetics out there, be able to increase stocking rates, and basically be able to spread that fixed land cost over as many animal units as possible, and do so without giving up productivity, should be critical to the long-term profitability of your enterprise. The second item I'll just mention is, something I think we can probably all agree on at least, and that is that in the last decade or so, the environment, climate, the term sustainability, as well as competition from some of our other competing protein sources. And, in the last couple of years, this development of this fake meat, all of these things are at the forefront of our consumers, and they're also, quite honestly, at the forefront of our policymakers. The reality is, if we really want to address some of these issues, improving efficiency can play a significant role in all of these areas. Finally, I think one of the factors that's impeded progress of improving and making a really great effort at improving feed efficiency, at least in the ruminant sector, has been the simple fact that measuring intake on an individual basis, historically has been very challenging. It's been an expensive endeavor. And to some extent, it's been easier for our industry to really focus on performance, maybe, rather than efficiency. So the challenge is, if all we do is focus on animal performance, things like growth, average daily gain, perhaps milk production, we're likely going to be pretty disappointed in the long-term return on investment from chasing after strict performance traits. I'm always reminded, I guess, of the work that was published by Fox and co-workers, now 20 years ago, pretty clearly illustrated that a 10% improvement in gain results in about an 18% improvement in profit. However, a 10% improvement in efficiency results in about a 43% improvement in profit. So, effectively, one of the ways I look at that is even if I'm only able to make a 5% improvement in efficiency, what that really means is I can still outpace anyone out there in terms of true profit. I can outpace those folks who are all they're doing is chasing gain and performance. So really, our mission at CLOC kind of ultimately focuses on the fact that if our industry really wants to improve efficiency, we want to improve sustainability and profitability, there's going to need to be a concerted effort to gather more efficiency data. And, kind of to that end, we've developed our smart feed systems to be exceptionally accurate, affordable way, a user-friendly system for measuring individual feed intake on the farm or on the ranch. And that's regardless of size or scale of the operation. One other side note is I'll just mention that another area that our company works in and continues to work on is the opportunity to precisely supplement and feed animals on an individual basis. We think that has great opportunities for improving really beef system efficiency. And, we accomplish that through our systems called Smart Feed Pro, as well as our Super Smart Feed system. So let's kind of get started. And the key things I wanted to visit about today are the ins and outs of planning for an efficiency test. We'll talk about things like our recommended stocking rates, some things to consider regarding installation and management. And then again, we'll talk and kind of wrap things up talking about some of our general guidelines for measuring intake and efficiency and some notes kind of on record keeping as well. So let's start, kind of getting into visiting a little bit about stocking rates for feed efficiency testing. And so this conversation kind of has to start by understanding that when we conduct a feed efficiency test, we're going to have to provide the animals with ad libitum access to feed and water. And we say ad libitum, all that simply means that these animals must always have available feed and water at all times. And so we have to realize that there's going to be limitations in terms of how many animals we can stock per smart feed feeder, smart feed unit, so that we don't create competition that would inadvertently limit intake of some of the animals that might be in our pen. So, in general, recommendations as we talk about that in terms of stocking rates for feed intake testing of growing age animals. When we talk about growing age animals, we define that as really being those animals between 7 and 15 months of age. The stocking rate that we'd recommend would be somewhere between 7 and 9 animals per unit. And so we kind of provide you a range there because there are some factors related to diet type. The type of diet that you provide these animals might influence really how long it takes them to eat, so have an effect on eating rate as well as meal duration. It also might have some limitations literally on how much feed is able to be placed in the bin at one point. But then there's also influences that can come in from the animal size and age that dictate what the intake potential of those animals might be. And then there's some environmental conditions. So, just kind of quick example, if you're planning to feed, we'll just say some older bulls, 12-month-old bulls in a northern climate, it's going to be during the winter. Without a doubt, we know the intakes of those bulls are going to be a little bit higher. And so we probably need to err towards the lower end of this stocking rate range, somewhere maybe 7, upwards of 8 bulls per smart feed unit. Conversely, if you're testing some young 8-month-old weaned heifers and it's during the summer, we know the intake's going to be considerably lower for those heifers, and we can likely kind of be on the little bit higher end of our stocking rate range. One of the really nice things about Smart Feed and this bunk system is that they are incredibly easy to install, and in fact, they're designed to be portable and easily relocated to different pens or locations. And so Smart Feed units are designed from a base design standpoint to be put into the fence line of a pen or of a lot. So think about any location where you might have a concrete J-bunk in the fence line. Those types of locations are going to be really suitable locations for putting these units in. And in fact, many of our users can pull out some existing J-bunks or some areas where they know that they could put J-bunks and be able to put those units right into that fence line. Now, in an ideal scenario, these units would be secured to a concrete pad, some concrete underneath these units. And then we just simply anchor those units using some concrete anchor bolts into that concrete. This is not necessarily a requirement. In fact, we have some units out there that have simply been secured by chaining the head stanchion to the posts that would be driven into the ground on either side of the unit. One consideration as you think about where you're wanting to put these units is that the ground does need to be relatively level. It doesn't have to be perfectly level, but we are operating fairly sensitive scales. And does need to be pretty level. Perhaps as important as having concrete underneath the units, second on a wish list that I would recommend if this is going to be a relatively permanent location would be to have a concrete feed apron that actually extends into the cattle pen in front of those bunks. So what that allows cattle to do is come up, they've got a dry place to stand, a good dry surface, and it really prevents them from creating a mud hole right in front of these bunks. Because Smart Feeds communicate their data using complete wireless communication methods, there's really no need to worry about having to provide or some way to protect network cables. You don't have to worry about purchasing additional computers, no additional software or data acquisition centers. Again, these units are designed to be plug and play. Finally, one of the questions we get a lot is, do we need to provide overhead structure for these units, or basically, keep them out of the wind or keep them out of the rain or the snow? And, from our company's perspective, providing an overhead structure is not a requirement. We designed this equipment to sit out and withstand the elements. However, it kind of comes back to where you're located, the amount of precipitation that you might receive, and this providing some overhead structure might be a wise investment. And in the long term, is it's going to help prevent feed spoilage and some feed waste, and perhaps some labor in having to maintain those feed bunks. Just a couple of notes, in terms of the power and data communications on these units. So in general, a 20 amp, 110 volt circuit, we can run about 15 Smart Feeds off of. So they have a very low power requirement. These units are all basically DC powered. And so should power supplies be a challenge, maybe it's cost prohibitive for you to bring power to the location where you develop your bulls or heifers, we can provide solar power kits that'll be designed specifically for your location and for your setup. Just also to reiterate, again, these units communicate completely wirelessly in real time. And so we're either going to use, if you have available, a Wi-Fi network at your location. If you don't have a Wi-Fi network, that's no problem. We can offer you a cellular modem. And then kind of depending on where you're at, who your best cell provider is, we'll work to find and secure the correct SIM card and data plan that will allow these units to seamlessly link and share data to the cloud and the server and back to you. Just wanted to give you also a few notes, day-to-day kind of feeding logistics and some things to think about. Again, cattle that are being tested on for feed efficiency, these cattle have to have this ad-lib diet, full feed. They can't have access to grazable pasture, or they can't have access to other sources of feed or hay that would be provided outside of these Smart Feed bunks. So this means you're going to be providing a complete diet to the animals in the Smart Feed bins, and it's likely going to require some equipment that has the ability, of course, to mix, handle, and deliver these diets to the animals. One consideration is to ensure that your feeding equipment that you're planning to use, it does a good job, an adequate job of thoroughly mixing the feed ingredients you're planning to use. So, this is really important, because if your final feed mix is not uniformly mixed, and so you've got some ingredients that don't get incorporated into that diet as well, you could potentially see these animals do some sorting. And so that can become an issue. So, if your feed mixer has some wear, or, you need to replace some auger flighting, make sure and keep that in mind, and do those types of maintenance on your equipment. Another consideration in terms of just day-to-day feeding and some things to think about is, the height of our smart feed, the front height of our feed bins is higher than the standard concrete fence line J bunk. And so you need a feed discharge tray, or the augers, to be able to clear the front end of our feed bunks. And so you need those augers to be able to clear about 38 inches, or about a meter in height, to be able to seamlessly go down and feed these animals. So we'll kind of switch gears now and just kind of run through the guidelines for feed intake testing and efficiency testing. And so one important thing to note is that these guidelines follow the guidelines that were developed by the Beef Improvement Federation. If you're interested in receiving a copy of our guidelines or the BIF guidelines, just let us know. The BIF guidelines are available online. Also important to mention, that while we follow the guidelines of BIF, we do understand that, different breeds and breed associations have different requirements for conducting a test and submitting data. It's important to understand that as a smart feed user with this system, you own the data, which includes any and all raw data all the way through to processed data and reports. And so you can do as you wish with this data. If you'd like to submit it to a breed association or some other third party, that is completely your decision and at your discretion, and we're able to assist you to make sure the data is available and it's formatted to your needs. So some basic guidelines for building test or pin contemporary groups. Obviously, as Jeff mentioned, these contemporary groups need to be the same sex. They need to be of similar breed composition. It's not to say that they all have to be one certain breed or all purebred, but we need to make sure we account for some major breed differences in these pens. Also, you want to make sure that these animals, they're of similar age and weight. So we're looking for groups of animals that don't have greater than a 90-day range in age or 300-pound range in weight. So this slide just provides you with the recommended timelines for testing periods. And so bear in mind, these are the actual on-feed test periods and do not include warm-up or acclimation periods. So, in general, depending on the scenario, we would recommend a minimum 7, if not upwards of 21-day warm-up period to get the animals acclimated to the diet and the feeders. So the first bullet point is related to the measurement or the collection of simple intake data. And so if all you're interested in is measuring simple dry matter intake, a 45-day test is all you'll have to do. Again, this data in general provides you with just that simple information related to who eats the most or who eats the least amount of feed. Now, onto the second bullet, this is where we start to get into the testing requirements for really computing feed efficiency and making those calculations, as Jeff mentioned, such as feed conversion ratio, residual feed intake, or residual average daily gain. And so to do those things, we have to utilize animal weights for computing, again, that average daily gain. So with using only chute weights, where we're physically running those animals to a chute, the recommended test period would be at minimum 70 days, basically to collect that gain data for a valid average daily gain calculation. We strongly recommend as well, to eliminate any issues in terms of fill or shrink or effective time of day, that we would average 2 consecutive day weights going across those chutes to establish the start and the end weights for that test period. The final thing that we could talk about a little bit is, we do have a smart scale system that measures animal weight and performance each time an animal goes to water. And so what this kind of does is it really shortens the testing time frame and can increase your throughput through your smart feed system. And so what a smart scale enables us to do is really gather lots of observations of animal weight and performance, and that will significantly decrease really the error rate around these chute-based weights and allow us to shorten that test time frame and have a valid average daily gain. So if we deploy a smart scale, the test period for feed efficiency can be substantially reduced all the way down to potentially as short as 45 days. One note is that, even with using smart scale, we still do recommend some chute weights kind of to start things off. So capturing those chute weights, what it'll do, kind of allow us to verify that the correction factor we use for converting partial to full body weight is on target for the type of cattle that you're feeding. Just kind of some basic final record keeping requirements, some stuff that's pretty obvious. Making sure we're tracking, keeping track of individual animal weights and dates, the start and end test dates. We also need to include records and information that would be related to your diet, and for sure that information related to the dry matter content of your diet is going to be important for that final dry matter calculation. It's also great if you can send that off, maybe get some nutrient composition. That way we know, have a record of that as well for what you are feeding. We want to ensure that the diet that you feed to these animals for the duration of that test is consistent. So as consistent as it can possibly be in terms of ingredients and composition. If for some reason you have to substitute an ingredient or something like that, make sure that those notes are kept and information regarding any change is made as part of your records. So I did want to give you just a quick snapshot, of our login user interface that you'd see on a daily basis if you were feeding cattle for a test using our smart feed system. And so this is how you would log in and manage the smart feed system. Again, this would be available from any internet connected device, including your phone or your iPad. So this first image is just simply what you'd see kind of at the login level. It's protected by username and password. You will be able to determine who has access to your system by basically just allowing other folks that may be at the farm or ranch to use your credentials. The second screenshot would be after you log in. One of the screens I use most frequently is here at the Feed and Gain tab that's located up in the top right side. Essentially, this is the default setting that would pop up that you would have the ability to see. And what it does is it shows you today's intake so far, along with the previous 3 days of intake by individual animal. Now, if you look at the top screen, you can toggle those dates anywhere you want. If you want to see the last 3 weeks, the last 6 weeks, whatever it is that you want to evaluate, you can pull that data and set that date range to whatever you'd like. So, this screen is really useful, not only from the standpoint of just viewing the intake of the animals, but what it does is it quickly allows you to kind of pinpoint cattle that are maybe decreasing in intake, which could be an indicator of potentially an animal that would be experiencing a health or, potentially an injury or other issue in that pen of cattle. So just kind of quick summary, efficiency, we think it's more important now than ever before. Given increased costs, we think about cost of feed and cost of land, all of these things. Efficiency is really kind of becoming that trait of critical importance of our industry because it addresses really the input side rather than the output. As much as anything, we want you to recognize that you now have affordable, accurate, and user-friendly methods for collecting efficiency data. Our smart feed systems are just really easy to use. They're easy to install. And they put data right at your fingertips using our login user interface. Guys, from there, that's kind of all I had for today. Again, appreciate everybody joining us, but I'm going to turn it back over to Jeff. He's going to kind of wrap things up here. And so appreciate your attention. Look forward to your questions here in just a few moments.
Thanks, Ted. Can everybody see my screen here? If you can, you'll notice there's a calf that I had found down in this old abandoned well, and I thought this picture would be good to include here. It just brings a few things to mind when I look at it. And one of those things is, this bull calf has the potential to grow and develop into a mature sire only if I can manage to get it out of that well. I feel like this situation can be applied to the beef industry when we look at the potential for growth and increased profitability that many producers have historically left on the table. specifically as it relates to measuring feed intake and using this valuable information to make informed breeding decisions. As Ted mentioned earlier in the presentation, measuring and monitoring feed intake has historically been time-consuming, labor-intensive, quite frankly, the exact opposite of user-friendly, and ultimately just too expensive, which has obviously up until this point drastically affected its adoption in the seed stock and commercial sectors. Our smart feed intake monitoring system was designed to overcome these obstacles and allow the industry to begin collecting more intake data on more animals, increase industry and breed association buy-in, and ultimately create an industry-wide paradigm shift from focusing solely on output to a more profit-centered approach that considers both pieces of the equation and focuses on input with the same degree of merit. Smart Feed may not be the only feed intake monitoring system on the market, but it is the only system currently available offering its users a few key advantages. Those advantages include completely wireless data transfer, along with the ability to move bunks from one testing location to another with ease. Smart Feed is not only portable, it's completely modular and scalable, as each bunk is essentially its own complete feed intake monitoring unit, and more units can be added to your existing set to expand testing capacity at any time. Not to mention, installation is so easy that all of this can be facilitated by you without having to make costly changes to your facility or hiring a tech to come perform the installation. With Smart Feed, as Ted had mentioned, it's simply plug and play. Another advantage that Smart Feed has over the competition would be its lack of additional computers and expensive software. Just log on to our secure cloud-based data management system from any computer with internet access, or download our smartphone app to manage your data in real time from the palm of your hand. With Smart Feed, you can also set up email alerts to notify you when individual animals go off of feed and may need a bit of extra attention. Many of our users have shared that Smart Feed can oftentimes identify sick cattle a day or two before clinical signs can even be seen. As we all know, the earlier we recognize any health issues and are able to identify and treat affected animals, the better. Along those lines, early identification of these animals can also enable us to utilize a much less expensive product to treat the illness. Lastly, CLOC is a family-owned and operated company. You can rest assured when you choose to partner with us that your data is safe and secure. We specialize in helping our customers to affordably and accurately collect and manage their data. We do not use or share any customer-produced data for our own financial gain or back-end product development. With Smart Feed, what you see is what you get. Along with the ability to provide our customers with customized data reports and analytics, our customer service and support team is simply second to none. And as you know, a company can have the best equipment around, but if you cannot get anyone on the phone to help troubleshoot when you need it the most, none of the rest even matters. At CLOC, we take this very seriously, and you can rest assured when you choose to partner with us that we will continue to provide the industry's best available service and support. With that, we would like to conclude the presentation portion of today, and I'm going to hand it over to Carla to facilitate some questions.
Thank you guys for the presentation today. Some great information. I just want to note for everybody that's attending the information for both Jeff and Ted. If you want to contact them directly, their phone number and their email is available on the screen. So if you want to further the conversation and maybe take that offline, you most definitely are welcome to reach out to either one of them. Today we didn't have a whole lot of questions. There's just a few of them. The first one is, how can breeding to a feed-efficient bull bring more money at sale time? Jeff, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. I've kind of been down that road before, as Carla mentioned in the beginning of the presentation. Before working for CLOC, I've managed seed stock, commercial operations, and also worked for some large Central Plains feed yards. And in the commercial sector, you know, if let's say you're selling calves at weaning, or even as yearlings off of grass, and this is how we marketed our calves, we really found the value from purchasing feed efficient bulls in part with marketing our calf crop. So like take our example, for instance, we would sell load lots on the video. And I would mention in the description, the ranch we purchased our bulls from, along with the fact that they were feed efficient and tested for feed efficiency. That right there normally would bring us $10 to $15 a hundredweight over light calves. These were nothing special. On our calves, they were straight bred Angus calves. They'd been implanted twice by the time these folks were buying them. And simply, kind of marketing the fact that these were out of feed efficient bulls certainly brought a slight premium when we were selling on the video. Now, we had some neighbors that had been at it probably about 15 years, whereas we had been at it about 5 or 6. And by that time, they built a reputation for shipping feed efficient cattle. And these feed yards, once they buy your calves, they're tracking everything that those cattle do from beginning to finish. And so they know, where they're getting the best bang for their buck. And so, like, take those cattle, for instance, from our neighbor, they'd bring roughly 40 to 60 cents above everybody else just because of their reputation for performance and feed efficiency. So, that's one sector. But let's say you're selling them as fat cattle. You're going to find the value there when you look at your reduction in cost of gain. That's going directly to you as the feeder. In the purebred and seed stock sector, I would say we've seen a tremendous amount of value added specifically in that segment of the industry as of late. You could look at a couple operations, throughout the states, such as Thomas Angus Ranch, out of Baker City, Oregon. They isolated that big data bull that they sold in 2018, I believe, in their California sale. He sold for $100,000, I believe, for half interest. That bull had the EPD profile. He also had the phenotype. And then when they coupled that with a proven, feed efficiency or feed conversion ratio number to that, it added a tremendous amount of value. Just last month, we had Virgo's sell their smart feed bull. They actually named after our system. He brought $105,000. So, seed stock guys can really find the value when they use our equipment to isolate that unicorn sitting in their pen or those genetics they didn't even know they had there, and really market that value to other producers. To take that a step further, I'd say I always looked at it like there was opportunity cost if I didn't buy feed efficient bulls. I was very data driven and I wanted to know what direction I was going. In fact, a lot of times I would tell guys that the feed efficient bulls I was buying were basically just to make sure I wasn't going the wrong direction. I don't want to be breeding cattle that do less with more. And so by buying those feed efficient bulls, you're going in the right direction. And let's say you keep replacement females, and that was kind of my big focus back in Northern California. I wanted to breed for efficient females. Well, feed efficiency is heritable anywhere between 16 and 43%. And so, it's a touch less than probably milk, but a touch more than a few other traits. But you can definitely make significant progress by breeding for feed efficient cattle. In fact, it's been shown that, if you stack feed efficient genetics on top of each other and even just 2 generations, you can decrease cow maintenance costs by up to 11%, which is huge. As cattle producers, feed costs are about 68% of our operational costs every year. And so to reduce those cow maintenance costs by 11% in just the first couple of years of kind of stacking these feed efficient genetics is tremendous. When you look at it from the perspective of, replacement females, every 10 you keep, you can add another one, to your stocking rate. So that can make a huge difference in our profitability. So, that's, I guess that would be kind of all I have on that. Ted, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you touched on pretty much everything there. I think, it does come back. I think we get that question pretty frequently in terms of, so how do we assess the value? What's the return on investment? And there's just a lot of it depends in everyone's different scenario. And you touched on a few of the key points, and that's, the opportunity to isolate and find, as you mentioned, the unicorns. out there and market them to a much higher level. But then it also really kind of comes back to who your customer base is, the opportunity that you have to help educate them in terms of maybe, helping them to understand how this feed efficiency fits into their operation, whether they're selling calves directly off of the farm, whether they're retaining females, maybe they're retaining ownership all the way to the rail, how that feed efficiency plays a role. And it plays a role in all three of those different scenarios. And so it kind of comes back to, your particular genetics, your particular clientele. But you did a great job. I don't have much else to add to it.
Actually, while you were talking, I thought of one more thing. It doesn't take any extra work to run a feed efficient bull versus a non-feed efficient bull. You're turning them out either way, so you might as well turn out some feed efficient bulls. And we talked about those unicorns selling for a pile of money, but there's many operations throughout the country, including Beer Goes. You could have gone to their sale and bought a very value priced feed efficient animal to bring home and turn out, and it's not going to cost you more than one that doesn't do that. So.
That's right.
Thanks, guys. I have another question here. We had a question about our suggestion for the question is, aren't there too many 7 to 9 heads per station? Isn't there strong competition among animals? I think, Ted, you've been using Smart Feed for quite a while. That feeding twice a day. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, we do get that question really frequently related to stocking rates. And, so we fall back to data really as much as anything, I think, on these stocking rate questions. And, with me currently, I'll use myself as an example. We have some now 13-month-old bulls on test, and we're stocked at just right at just a shade under 8 bulls per Smart Feed unit. Just to share with you, I pulled it late last week in aggregated to look at really the feeding behavior side and how many minutes or how many hours a day are my Smart Feed bunks sitting empty. And as of last week, basically my Smart Feed bunks were sitting empty on average per day, just right at just a hair shy of 11 hours per day, which tells me, there is no doubt in any group of bulls, in any group of heifers, there's going to be a pecking order within those animals. And but the key thing is, as long as that feed is thoroughly mixed, and so we don't have issues with sorting, and as long as those animals have ample time to access those bunks, we feel really confident, that 7 to 9 stocking rate range, you're not going to see any real adverse effects in terms of competition for time and space there at a feeder. No doubt, it's a change in kind of the dynamics. If you're used to feeding cattle, maybe developing bulls with 18 inches of bunk space per animal, where there's ample room for everybody to line up, it changes that dynamic to some extent, no doubt. But at the same time, we're making sure those bulls have feed in the bunks all the time. So it kind of becomes a time allotment scenario where just making sure that the bulls are not forced to be prevented from having access to that feed. So good question. Some of that stocking rate also kind of depends on, again, that diet type. But we would love to work with anybody if your preference is to have lower stocking rates, I suppose.
Thank you, Ted. The next question I have is, how can I identify feed efficient bloodlines that I may have bred to in the past years? Jeff, you want to take that one?
I'll take a stab at that. I'd say bring in some Smart feed bunks and start testing progeny. That's kind of my answer to that question. No, but there is, there's some data you can find from past tests and things. I mean, you can take a look at Midland. I know, I think it was ABS has come out with some feed efficiency rankings, and there's been some other testings done on some more widely used sires and progeny. So a quick search on the internet can kind of give you a really good idea of how those cattle have performed in the past. But quite honestly, I talked to some people in the seed stock business that aren't as interested in kind of implementing this technology, and they're kind of big. The reason for that is, they're just they're going to let everyone else test for it, and then they'll DNA them. Well, I've bought enough feed tested bulls by now, and I've DNA'd enough females out of those bulls to know that you really need to run these cattle through a test in order to effectively gauge where they're at on the spectrum of feed efficiency. DNA is just not enough. It is a real tool, and I've used it personally in my own operation, and it works very well, but it's simply kind of follows the average. So on a large swath of animals, it can be very accurate to select using DNA. But at the same time, it's just one of our tools, and we need to combine that with actual phenotype in order to really kind of move the needle in the right direction. So.
Thank you, Jeff. Just a quick question here. I see. Do you market products globally? Ted, do you want to answer that one of where you sent equipment in the past?
Absolutely, yeah, that's an easy one. I think Jeff mentioned, we have systems for our green feed system in well over, I think, 35 plus countries now, and have smart feed in I don't know how many different countries, but most certainly we're anxious to continue to expand kind of our reach across the globe and work with multiple different countries, and can get that equipment to you pretty easily.
Thank you, Ted. The next one I have is a little bit tougher question, it looks like. Is there any negative impacts to selecting to negative RFI?
I could take a quick stab at that. Yes and no. So, in any breeding program, you need to have clearly defined goals before you embark on a journey like selecting for a negative RFI or increased feed efficiency. The other thing to consider with RFI is that, as I mentioned in the presentation, it's only really relevant to that contemporary group. As I found in my own personal operation, as I progressed in genetic selection for feed efficient traits, quite honestly, I threw out RFI and strictly looked at feed conversion ratio and average daily gain. And from my perspective, the cattle that I'd seen selected based upon those two numbers outperformed some of the best RFI cattle, and some examples of why that might happen, would be, let's say a calf gets on test and gets sick, but he still kind of keeps up and consumption, drops significantly, but he's still growing a bit. He could very well at the end of the test end up with a significantly lower RFI simply because he was sick during the test. And so we do follow that, and we will try and kind of remove those outliers to make your ending data set more accurate. But those things do happen, and in my own personal journey with this, I simply went back to the cow pedigrees that I knew performed well in our environment and produced females that lasted. And then I would look at average daily gain and feed conversion to make sure we were keeping the performance but weren't necessarily going backwards. And like I mentioned that earlier, but another reason on that is because back fats actually negatively correlated with feed efficiency to a degree. So for me, I wanted to maintain that fleshing ability in our cows and fertility, and didn't want to breed the back fat off those cattle. So, I think anytime we select for one trait alone, it's kind of the wrong way to look at it. And so, I would caution you, to single trait select like that. You kind of have to take the whole picture into account, and, and figure out where the numbers fall that are going to best help your operation move forward. I hope that answers the question in a roundabout way. So,
thank you, Jeff. Ted, did you have anything that you'd want to add?
I think Jeff hit the nail on the head on that one again too, and especially the part there towards the end where it's I think single trait selection gets everybody in trouble regardless of the trait, and RFI would not be an exception to that rule. So as important as efficiency is, it shouldn't be, you know, an on-off switch in terms of all we're going to do is pick up a catalog and identify the lowest RFI bull and just getting bought without considering all the other traits that are involved that are certainly very important to your enterprise as well. So no, perfect.
And actually, Ted, too, I should mention, you know, I mentioned selecting based off of average daily gain and feed conversion ratio. If you do simply just that, you're going to breed for larger mature weight, you know, larger cattle in a sense. Now they'll have performance, but they may not be as feed efficient. So you have to be careful going that route as well. So.
Very good. Thank you, Jeff. To piggyback a little bit on equipment that we have sent all over the world, question is, do you have setups that work with horned cattle? Ted, I think you've sent some stuff out with horned cattle.
Yeah, we've had interest in testing horned cattle through multiple different systems, and so our head stanchion is nicely adjustable, and I don't remember the exact width, and I don't know exactly how, quite honestly, big a horns you're talking about. But you know, the thing I guess I always recall and know about horned cattle is they figure out how to use those horns pretty nicely. The question is, can they get them back out? And they go in pretty easily, and can they get them back out? So I think we can make some adjustments and make some accommodations. If you are strictly testing horned cattle, we can work with you to make sure that head stanchion is going to accommodate your animals and not be a threat or an issue in terms of safety for your animals as well. So you bet. One of the nice things about C-Lock is we do have the ability, we customize. We've got a full engineering team that if we have special requests, special interests from the standpoint of feed bins and sizes, special configurations, we have the ability to spec those out and get the customer what they need that will work for them. But yeah, great question. We can handle the horned cattle.
Perfect. Thank you. I've got some other questions here, and I think some of these are probably going to be a one-on-one conversation. So I will definitely hand these off over to Ted and Jeff. So maybe we can have a one-on-one conversation that'll maybe go a little bit different direction on some various equipment that we have to offer. So I don't think we have anything else. Jeff and Ted, do you have any other thoughts or comments that you'd like to touch on before we sign off today?
Well, I just want to thank everyone for attending, and we appreciate you taking the time out of your day to kind of meet with us. And like Carla was saying, if you have any kind of more technical questions, you know, we'd love to have a personal conversation with you sometime after the webinar, and also we may touch on those subjects in the upcoming webinar, so stay tuned for that. But just wanted to thank you all for being here.
Yep, absolutely. Appreciate all of your time and your attention, and like Jeff said, reach out to us and be happy to work with you in any way we can.
And with that, guys, we will follow up with the questions that have been remitted. And if you have questions further, definitely reach out to us. We're here to help in any way we can. So thank you guys for your attention today, and have a great afternoon.
Yep. Thanks, guys.
Take care.